I'm on.
Don't be self-conscious at all.
Is it a
We'll zoom in.
long play?
I don't know.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. You're right.
Okay,
I don't know if you want any background noise, but Grandma's not through with her story yet.
oh,
Well, we could go out in the.
well, yeah, we could go downstairs or something.
You getting a battery here, kid?
Yeah, I charged it before here. And we're taping all this, wonderful. Okay. Messages start. I just have milkman question mark because it's such a great job.
Oh, yeah. I can talk about that for a while. In the early years, when I was still a little kid, then my dad drove a wagon with horses,
Really?
delivering milk around Milwaukee. And they would drive through the alleys behind the houses, and the horse would stop and he would take the milk in, and there was a milk chute that they put it into. It was just a little box.
Oh.
And
When I think shoot, I think like the shoot, like the launder shoot.
yeah, in those days, every house had this little box by the back door, about like that would fit some milk and butter or something. And the horse would walk up to the next stop. The horse knew the entire route, and my dad would just have to run in and run out. And when I was a kid, a couple of times I went with him, and I would be,
That was Dad.
Okay, I'm going out here
All good.
for Baker.
so I would
Good.
be in the wagon saying giddy up and whoa to the horse,
Yeah, was it?
not knowing that the horse knew where he was going anyway. And it was really great fun. And when I got through, I came back home and my mom said, well, how'd you like it? And I said, I think I want to be a milkman when I grow up. You don't have to know much.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah,
Did you have to get up really early? To
yeah.
figure out?
Oh, he would get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Gosh.
And where we grew up, the place where he worked out of, the dairy, was right across the street. And it was called Gridley Dairy, which was the name of the guy that started it. And then eventually it was bought out by Borden's, which is still around.
Yeah, I never heard of that.
But eventually then they changed over to trucks. And,
Yeah.
and then there's a few of them around Twin Cities, but
One is,
hardly anybody gets their milk delivered anymore.
I wonder why you would now, because it's what you used to go to the grocery store.
Yeah, well, it's a convenience where a lot of people back in those days didn't drive a car.
Well, yeah, because they're kind of expensive yet.
Yeah, I've got, on my mother's side of the family, there were like 7 siblings of hers, and I think out of those, 1 or 2 ever had a driver's license. The rest of them lived their entire life taking the bus and the streetcar, or hitching a ride. My dad drove, so he was always forever
Did
taking.
you start driving the truck after they implemented back to that and that boatman?
Now,
Or is that still horses?
he drove. I mean, learn to drive.
Yeah, I mean, like, do you drive the truck as a milkman, or is it always horses?
As a milkman part, early years it was a horse, and then they modernized, and then
Yeah.
he drove the truck. But he knew how to drive a car, and it might be the same thing. If you grow up on a farm, usually you learn how to take care of horses, which is one thing he did, and you learn how to drive a tractor.
Yeah, my mom did that too.
So he was one of the first young guys. This would have been in early 1900s that had a car. It was a big deal.
Yeah. I'm reading a book called The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
I'm doing that for one of my other projects for school, and so it's kind of,
So you see those trucks?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And like and the whole, like, half the book is just about the car breaking down, the problems with the car, you buy all this stuff to keep the car going, or you don't get anywhere.
yeah. And tires would last for about 50 miles and then they blew
Yeah.
out.
And like the family, the Joes, they bought a car, they bought a particular car, no, it was different people. But they bought a particular car just because it was common, so they could buy wheels for cheap.
Sure.
Which I suppose makes sense, I was like, that makes sense.
And of course, they didn't have a lot of money, so, you know.
Yeah, like they started with like, $200 to get from Oklahoma to
Mhm.
California. Anyway, and then, much later, like you moved because you you changed job places, right?
Yeah,
Wait, so you did like management for?
yeah, I started out, well, interesting, my dad being a milkman, I ended up in the milk business.
Oh yeah, I thought I knew that, but.
Yeah, although I didn't deliver milk. But, so I went to college and took what they call dairy industry, which is not the cow
This is
side.
dairy, not daily, I was like,
Yeah, that's not the cow side of the dairy. It's the making butter, making cheese,
bottling the milk.
bottling the milk and this sort of thing. And then I got my first job, I was in the laboratory. I was a laboratory supervisor, and there were about 3 or 4 people in the lab that tested the milk and the cheese and so on. And then moved up, from there to like assistant manager of a plant, and then manager of a plant, and then finally operations manager. For this is, I spent my entire life working for dairy cooperatives, which, like Land O'Lakes, is the
Yeah,
one that people know up here.
yeah, then like people went to, a family in my school, like runs a dairy farm, they bottle their own milk and they sell it to the grocery store.
Yeah,
It comes in glass bottles and you give the glass bottles back. It's good milk.
see, that's fairly new. Nobody was doing that when I was out there,
The glass bottles thing.
or the individual farmer
Yeah,
doing his own milk.
'cause usually you just like milk the cows, give the milk to companies and they do it for you.
Yeah, there would be, but in the early years, there were 10-gallon cans. See the milk can outside our front door?
Yeah.
That's a milk can, painted,
that-
of course.
Was that one of the ones that was in your company, you just like took from the company? Or
I don't even
no?
remember where we got it, but it was
Oh.
like those, that the farmers would put the milk in those and put it in cold water and cool it down. Then a truck would come around, pick it up, bring it to the plant, and they would dump it in the tanks. And then we would make butter or cheese or something out of it.
Okay, so like, so you moved, just back to the original question, so you moved because you did change jobs, and like, how did that affect like your life and family?
How did it affect the family?
Yeah, so I know you moved a lot.
Yeah, I was just moved from my first job to the second job when Graham and I got married. And this town of Keel is halfway in between Milwaukee and Green Bay. And my parents were from Milwaukee and her parents from Green Bay. So we would drive back and forth. One weekend we'd go to Milwaukee, and the next weekend we'd go to Green Bay to see the parents. And then the next job I took was in Minnesota, which was 350 miles away.
Yeah.
And our parents were not real happy,
Being
and
so far away.
and by the time we moved up there, we had Kathy and Steve, and moved to Winthrop, and then the other two
Yeah.
guys came later. So Grandma pretty much had to raise the 4 kids by herself without a lot of family help.
Because you're working all the time.
Yeah, I was in the plant or on the road or doing something, and she didn't have her mother next door to help.
Yeah, because,
It was kind of like you and your other grandma.
yeah, because I was thinking the same thing, because mom moved up here.
Yeah, is that if you were living in Hubbard, Iowa,
Yeah, I could,
she could help more as you
like,
kids grow
like,
up.
it's kinda like with Finn, cause like you help take care of Finn when
Yeah,
Ryan was not have to.
cause we're close by.
Right, well, close-ish, but.
Yeah. But I was going where the work was.
Yeah, cause like, I very, like, for us, it's very unusual we haven't moved, especially that, cause dad's moved like 6 years ago.
Yes.
Dad hasn't moved out of Minnesota, which is surprising, I think, but, okay, let's see, chemical jobs. Depression was super early in your life, but did anything, like, super affect,
Say it again?
like, depression was super early in your life, but that was only like, first, like, what, 10 years? Not
Yeah,
even?
no, I was born in 1931,
Yeah,
and,
it ended like when the World War I started, so,
well, yeah, I was gonna, World War II.
well, that's my mind.
Yeah, and that kind of is what ended it.
Yeah,
They were still struggling, trying to get things back to normal in 1939, 1940. And then the war came along, and then everybody had jobs. You know, a lot of the young men had put on a uniform and go overseas, and so that was when women first started working outside of the house. They worked in factories, they built tanks and planes, and then a lot of them, then when the war was over, then they went back home. But for many of them, that was just the beginning of a career.
so a lot of them like went back, majority of them.
A lot of the women, you mean?
Yeah, cause, this was like making back to the jobs back.
Yeah, it was, and again, I don't remember this, but I would
Right,
think it'd be difficult when suddenly, at the end of the war, all these young men came back over and wanted their jobs back. And at the same time, the companies were not building planes and tanks
I guess they
anymore.
didn't really have the job either way, no matter if you went to the jobs or not.
Yeah, so I think in many cases, the women were asked to leave or laid off. And,
Which they could do about either.
yeah, and the men got the jobs. But I can remember December 7th, 1941, which was the beginning of the Second World War, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And I can remember there was VE Day, which was Victory in Europe, and then there was VJ Day, which was Victory in Japan, with each one about a year apart. And I think it was VE Day, we lived on a street that was like a highway, and there were buses that ran on it, there was a lot of traffic, and a bunch of the neighbor boys that were older than I was, they got toilet paper out and strung toilet paper across the road from tree to tree, so the cars had to drive through it, and everybody was hooting and hollering.
Nothing changed there.
Yeah, so I was, I was 10 years old at the beginning of the war, and then I'd have been about 15 at the end of the war. So I can remember when they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and right after that, then the war was over. But I was too young to be in it,
Right, so it's kind of relief.
which was kind of relief. And so then I got out of high school in 1950, and then I think about a year later, then the Korean conflict started.
Yeah, it wasn't really a war.
It wasn't a war. I hesitated, because
Yeah.
most people call it a war, but it really was just a conflict. In fact, I believe North and South Korea have never had signed off. They're still technically at war
Really?
after
I didn't know that.
after all these years, and they don't get along.
Like a lot of places.
Haven't for a long time. But I decided after I got out of high school, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. As I indicated in there, I was not the world's greatest student. I got a job working for Evinrude Motors, which is a company that makes outboard motors for boats. They had a factory in Milwaukee. And worked there for a while, got laid off, went to another place called the Falk Corporation, which is still in business.
What's that do?
It was a big foundry, and they made great big castings, like as big as this room, that holes in certain places. To be honest with you, I don't know what they did with them. They sold them. And I worked there. I had one job, and this is without any training. I was a crane hitcher. They had these overhead tracks with a chain that came down with a hook, and then you hooked this onto these big metal dealies and lift them up and take them around. And then there was a person up in the cab up there, and they ran the thing. And they're up like 30, 40 feet. And there was a woman running this thing. She was a carryover from the Second World War.
Oh.
She was still working. She would position this thing over the equipment, then I would put a hook in here and a hook in over there, and then stand back and she'd raise it. And one time I didn't back up, and I'm standing there, the chain let loose, and this big thing was about a foot off the ground and came crashing down towards the ground where my feet were.
Did it hit you?
And she turned the control wide open and stopped it about that far from my feet. I think I'd lost all my toes. So I was getting to the point that I thought, you know, this maybe isn't what I want to do the rest of my life.
Bad idea.
And I had some buddies in high school, and we decided, some of us independently and some talking, that we needed to go to college. And I didn't have I had a little bit of money saved, but I went to talk to my dad, and my sister didn't go to college. In our whole extended family, of my mother, my father's side, my cousins, I was the only one that ever went to college.
Did Lethbridge go to college then?
Pardon?
Did Lethbridge go to college, like, generally?
Not a lot of people. But anyway, I went with this buddy of mine to what they call the State Teachers College, which is really, at that point, was a school that taught you to be a teacher. And took the entrance exam and gave him our records. And we got our notices later. He didn't do well enough on the test, and my grades for high school weren't good enough. They turned us down. And State Teachers Colleges then had the reputation of being the easiest place in the world. So we thought, well, what, you know? The University of Wisconsin, because it was a state organization, had to let you go to school. So I suppose for a semester, if you didn't make it, you flunked out. And so we both went in there, as did about 4 or 5 other friends of mine. And they had an extension division in Milwaukee. The University of Wisconsin is in Madison, which is about 100 miles from Milwaukee.
So kind of far.
Yeah, but they had this extension division downtown Milwaukee, and the campus consisted of a little square grass, about like our front lawn. And that was it. They were just building. They had, they call them Quonset huts. They were left over from the Second World War, the prefab buildings. And then we had some of our classes in there. So it wasn't really, you know, what you typically think going to school.
Yeah.
And I stayed at home and drove down there. But I was declared 1A for the Army, to be drafted into the Army. But you could get a deferment if you kept your grades up. And so I went through my 4 years of college, 2 years in Milwaukee, and then that was as far as they went. Then 2 more years in Madison at the U, and got my degree like in June, whatever, I guess June graduate.
Yeah.
And then got drafted in September.
Even though you had finished college,
Yeah,
they still did that.
and they looked at, here's a college graduate, you'd think
Yeah.
that they could find a place for me. There was a division based in Chicago, Illinois, that traveled the Midwest. These were Army people. Drove in an Army car and went around to the plants in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, that sold dairy products to the Army, and they needed inspectors. Well, I just graduated from college in that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I told them that and told them I wanted to try out for it. Didn't get it. There was a guy that had signed up. I was in there for 2 years. I was drafted. There was a guy who was a political science major who had gone in for 4 years. He instead of being drafted, he volunteered.
Yeah.
And because of that, he got his choice of whatever he wanted
Yeah,
to
because
do.
that was kind of like one of the ways to get out of the draft was like volunteering, kind of.
Yeah. Of the guys I went into college with, there were about 5 of us. One guy graduated from school 2 years after I did. 4 of them went in the Air Force for 4 years. See, I chose the deferment route,
Yeah.
even though my grades weren't that great, but I decided I didn't want to put in 4 years in the Air Force. So these guys all went, well, some went overseas, some didn't, put in their 4 years and came back. But at that point, they only had like 1 year of college.
Right, which is a lot different.
And now they're 4 years older, and they got married, and the kids they were in class with were 4 years younger. None of them finished college. So the route I chose at least got me a college degree.
Yeah.
And the Army was, well, I ended up in the medics because the place where they trained the medics in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, was where the school was for this, training people to go around and
Oh,
check
okay,
out.
so you're kind of there anyway.
And they said, well, maybe if you're down there in the medics, if there's a cancellation, you can get in.
So it's kind of.
So I went down there were no cancellations, so I ended up in the medics. And then from there, they put us on a train and took us to New York and put us on a boat and sent us over to Germany. About half of our class went to Korea.
Did you go to
I didn't go to Korea. Those that went to Korea, they were out in foxholes and they were in really cold weather outside, freezing. They said I met some of them then when we all were ready to get out of the Army 2 years later, and the guys that went to Korea said it was really not nice at all. And,
Understatement much.
yeah, and we had it pretty good. We stayed in German barracks and got a chance to tour Germany and went to Italy and Switzerland, went to Paris, and, it's one of those things that I wouldn't want to do it again,
But
but I'm glad I did it.
yeah, because
Yeah.
to see Europe,
It was interesting. So then when I got out of there, I think I was out of the Army about a month, and then I got my first job
at
What?
the dairy.
at the dairy at Denmark, Wisconsin, which happened to be about 10 miles from where Grandma lived.
Oh,
That's how we met.
in your company?
No,
No.
just out and about. We were both single, so we were out, going around on weekends. The difference was, I got my 4 years of college and 2 years in the Army, and then so now I was pushing 30, and she was not that long out of high school. So when we got married, she was about 22, and I was 30.
Kind of big difference, what would be
At
age.
that time,
Yeah.
it seemed like a large difference.
Yeah, kind of different.
Now it doesn't.
Kind of like 2 years from like elementary to high school makes a huge difference.
Yes.
It's like first grade to third grade is huge, and then junior to your sophomore to senior isn't that big. But yeah,
And I told people, I said, I was older and more mature, and I could see something in her that these stupid kids of her age didn't see. Because otherwise, I'm sure she'd have married a local guy and she would still be over in the Green Bay, or she'd be a Packer fan.
Packer.
Yeah,
Cheeseheads.
yeah. So, but then I had moved, got transferred down to Kiel, which was maybe another 30, 40 miles away. And so for maybe the last 6 months before we got married, I was running back up to Green Bay, on weekends. And then, of course, after we got married, then she moved down to Kiel, moved away from all her friends. She didn't know anybody, when she got down there. Then, of course, moved to Winthrop, where we were now 300 miles away from anybody.
Yeah.
We knew. But she said she grew, and she didn't have anybody else to lean on, and because I was working a lot of hours, that she grew up in a hurry
Suppose you're gonna have to.
with 4 kids,
Yeah, because you had Kathy how many years after you were married, or not even?
Year,
Yeah,
and then Steve is exactly a year later.
exactly a year later. Just so
And,
fun.
And we had those first 2 just before we moved to Winthrop. I think Kathy, when we moved, was like 2, and Steve was 1.
So they wouldn't remember that first time.
And then, of course, we had, or she had each one in a small town hospital. And she said it was really nice. They really took care of them. Now, if a woman has a baby, about 24 hours later, they're out of the hospital.
Yeah, you kind of have to be.
Yeah, I think she spent a good part of a week and being waited on by the nurses
Yeah,
and
because
the nurses' aides.
now a lot of patients to take care of.
Yeah,
So it makes sense.
yeah. In fact, I think at least with one of them, she was the only woman in there with a baby. In the entire hospital.
Pretty small hospital then.
Yeah, they were really.
Well, that's kind of all I've got at the moment. Kind of covered your entire life in like, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah. But I retired early. I noticed in there.
Yeah.
I mentioned it. My dad retired with a bad back. Part of it from the job of
But,
carrying the
yeah.
milk in and out and jumping up and down in the truck and so on. And I set as a goal that I wanted to retire at the same time he did. And I did, well, I'm not sure if who beat who, but it was within the same year. We both retired at 61.
So you wanted to retire earlier or later than you did?
About the same time.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't want to be much later. But I should go back to the early part of my life, because my dad, in addition to being a milkman, his hobby was pigeons.
Pigeons, how so?
Well, he raised them. The little ones, when they come out of the nest, it's called a squab. And they're little fat things, they can't fly. They're a delicacy. They're like, do you ever have any Cornish hens?
Nope.
They're, it'd be like a very small chicken. And it's all dark meat. And he he would raise the squabs. We had, on our property, we had maybe, we had 4 acres, I don't know. You don't have 4
We
acres,
have
huh?
7.
We got 7, okay.
Yeah, and then, but majority of it's prairie, so I think of the actual grass part is probably about 4 or 5
Okay.
acres.
So we had 4 acres, and we had apple orchard, a couple cherry trees, chicken coop, but we had 2 great big barns full of pigeons.
Like as big as ours, or a little smaller than that?
They were more, they weren't barns.
Oh,
They-
like there was kind of sheds.
Yeah, one of them was long and narrow, and there'd be the pigeon coops along one side with the place, the fence in there, if they could fly a little bit outside. And the other one, I don't know what it was, had been a horse barn. It was big and square, but he had as many as over 1,000 birds at one time. But when he, to get these squabs to people who were going to have a dinner and eat them, there were people in the suburbs of Milwaukee, in the areas where the rich people lived, and he would deliver them there, and they would have a big dinner, and the butler would come out. I'd ride with him, and he'd drive over there, and the butler would come out, and the cook, and maybe a maid or 2, and help us carry the pigeons in, and they'd have a dinner that night or the next night with 20, 30 people. It's a big deal. But he also raised them for showing, like they did at the state fair.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen?
Yeah, I've seen the birds in the cages with all the rabbits.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I was raised in that, call it that climate,
Yeah.
pigeons. Unfortunately, I had asthma and hay fever,
Oh.
and I would get into the pigeon coop
You start
and I'd start sneezing.
Kind of like Aaron.
Yeah, but one thing I did, my dad would kill these young birds, sometimes as many as 50 to 100 at a time, and we'd have to take the feathers off. And the way he had it arranged, there was a string coming down from the ceiling with a little noose on the end, and we put that noose around their feet. This is their dad now,
Yeah.
just hanging there, and then we would dry pluck them or dry pick them, take the feathers off. Like chickens now, they usually dip them in water, hot water or something, and then take the feathers off.
Oh.
But he felt that this made the squab look better, so we would dry pick them. And I started doing that when I was like about 11 or so. And when I first started, we were paid a penny a pigeon. And so some days I'd make 20 cents. And young neighborhood boys would come in. He usually had 2 or 3 or 4 of them all in there at the same
So you
time.
pay them too.
Yeah, and everybody got paid. I got paid the same thing they did. But I couldn't say no. In other words, some of these kids would say, "Oh, I'm too busy today."
You had a
I didn't
choice.
have that option. But I did that until I was, 15. I was I set the record of how many pigeons that I had picked, which is taking the feathers off, in an hour. I think I did like 20 of them in an hour. It was an art. I could take the feathers off a wing with just one, like that, and along the feathers off. The tail feathers.
Pretty skilled at taking
And
feathers off
I could I could still do it, not that fast. And as time went on, as cost of living went up, and these kids would find better jobs, my dad would have to increase the what he paid per bird, till I think when I finally was old enough to quit, I was getting 5 cents.
Ooh.
So theoretically, if I was going wide open, I could make $1 in an hour, which was a lot of money back in those
Yeah,
days.
no kidding.
So I never
Well, not enough for kids.
never really worked out of the house. I never got a job at a grocery store
Didn't mean to.
or delivering mail or anything like that,
Yeah.
because my dad wanted me available to pick the pigeons. And he stayed involved in pigeons his entire life. I've got a plaque hanging in my room. Remember the date. We could go look at it, but he's in the Pigeon Hall of Fame. You think there'd be
Really?
you think there'd be pigeons in there? It's people that contributed
Huh.
to the industry, yeah.
Why is he in the Hall of Fame?
Because
For?
he was a pigeon judge.
Oh.
He would go to Wisconsin State Fair, Minnesota State Fair, Iowa, Michigan. They would fly him.
Did you go with him?
No,
Oh.
they would fly him, pay his way, fly him, so he could judge the pigeons. And to be a judge, you had to be very honest and don't show any favoritism. Because once you did that, you're out of the business. And he was, I guess, very honest. But I went, he got me a job at the Wisconsin State Fair, taking care of the birds in the coops, feeding them and watering them, and then I would bring them, when they were judging them, I would bring them to the center area where they judged them and take them back again. So he was really disappointed. I told people, I didn't tell him, I told people that I was kind of interested in pigeons until I met girls.
The
Changed-
girls replaced
I changed my focus. Girls were more interested in pigeons. So I never had pigeons of my own.
Did you think about it
Uh,
after you're married?
no, I knew that it would make him really happy if I did it, but with the hay fever and asthma,
Yeah, I suppose.
I really would have had a problem. So I know he was disappointed. But he was pleased that I stayed in the milk business.
Yeah, I suppose that definitely influenced your job decision.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it did so much. It may have been circumstances, but it was something I was, comfortable with because he was in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I don't really have anything else.
I got lots more.
I figured you do.
It will overwhelm you.
And we have to go through this again.
Yeah. So what you want to do is absorb this and then come back again.
Yeah, with more questions, yeah. I have to
Sure.
probably go through some of the footage again and go over
Okay.
it again. Okay, awesome.
Now you can turn that thing off.
Yeah.